Welcome into the Stack Shack Sports Show. Little new streaming setup, traveling, so you're going to see this for a little while. But had to jump in here. We had a great weekend of college football. Well, really not weekend, but holiday season of college football. And there's a lot of games that had a lot of meaning. We had four of them, four big playoff games. Man, I do really love this college football playoff. We just get some great games, and there were fantastic games over the weekend. We're going to go through each and every one of them. So here's how it ended up just at a high level. We got Oregon beating Texas Tech, Indiana beating Alabama, Ole Miss and Georgia in a classic that I just can't wait to discuss. Miami beating Ohio State, kind of a big upset there. A lot of people didn't see coming. And that was actually the first game of the week. Happened on Wednesday, New Year's Eve. I know guests were starting to arrive for the party, and we were watching what turned out to be a really solid football game. Ohio State loses by 10, and I'm going to be honest, I don't feel like this game was actually that close, at least from the beginning. Miami does jump out to a 14-0 lead in the first half. I think that really, kind of set the tone and gave it this feeling that Miami really dominated and pushed around an Ohio State team that nobody was expecting that. Ohio State comes in as the number 2 seed, and vaunted defense, and Julian Sayin, young quarterback. He was one of the Heisman finalists. I'm wondering if maybe that was a bad decision. Interestingly enough, if you look at the box score, Sayin threw for a lot of yards, didn't have terrible numbers. He did throw 2 interceptions, which was unfortunate. But it's the rushing yards. If we look at the team stats, 153 rushing yards for Miami to 45 in Ohio State. It's amazing. In all of the talk about quarterbacks and receivers and Jeremiah Smith, and we talk about these eras of offense that we're in both college and NFL. At the end of the day, if you control the line of scrimmage, you're in a really good position as a college football team, as an NFL football team. And that's what Miami did. This entire game is they dominated and pushed around Ohio State. Ohio State didn't get blown out. It's still a 10-point game. They still had opportunities. But you look at, rushing yards is the easiest way to look at this. They actually had more yards per play. They had more passing yards by far, but they gave up 153 yards on the ground. And when it's easy to just get these chunk plays on the ground and kind of dominate time of possession in some ways, and then you have a couple of turnovers, 2 interceptions by your quarterback, you're not going to beat a team like Miami. And that's what happened. So Ohio State, coming off of a national championship, very excited, kind of cruised, but then towards the end, they lose to Indiana, kind of looked like they got pushed around the field, and then they lose to Miami and kind of get pushed around the field. And that, I think that was surprising for a lot of folks. I don't think that's something that was expected. Obviously, Ohio State was favored in this game. Carson Beck didn't turn the ball over, and this season, I know Miami has 2 losses that we've talked about on this channel. They weren't great losses, but they were high turnover games for Carson Beck. He didn't turn the ball over. And so far this season, when Carson Beck has not turned the ball over for Miami, they've won. And they showed that they are legit. And it gives more credibility to the committee on their decision. This is a Miami team that is now in the semifinals that was on the outside looking in until the very last week of the season. So I find that fascinating that, a team with 2 losses, an ACC team that didn't even get in to their own conference championship. We talk about the lack of ACC talent, so to speak, in the league. maybe the ACC is better than we thought, right? We're thinking the Big Ten, SEC, those are almost the Power 2 conferences these days. But then you take a look at the results in these playoffs and the bowl games. I don't know. The ACC, I don't think is maybe as bad as we thought it was. Miami, 2-loss team, didn't even make the ACC championship game, comes in, beats Ohio State. And I've got a thought on Ohio State that we'll talk about in a moment. But let's move on to the next game. This was actually the game I thought was going to be best over the weekend. This is the game I had kind of circled as I can't wait to see what happens on that. And that game is Oregon and Texas Tech. 23-0, Oregon rolls them. Didn't feel particularly close. Texas Tech really couldn't do anything on offense. Multiple turnovers. We look at the team stats here. Oregon only gave up 215 yards of offense, and this is a week after they gave up over 500 yards of offense to JMU. Texas Tech's not able to move the ball against them. I was surprised by that. You can say Oregon wasn't up for that game, but, I mean, the beginning of the game, they played starters. Towards the end, they were still playing starters. I think this is a perfect example of Texas Tech's offense is not their strong suit. I mean, Texas Tech this year has been all about their defense. That defensive line is fantastic, the linebackers, etc. But when you turn the ball over multiple times, multiple interceptions, and you give Oregon had so much good field position in this game, eventually your defense is going to give up some points. I mean, you look at the box score and how this happened. They only gave up 6 points in the first half, 2 field goals, right? And then as the game goes on, the defense is just going to get tired. It's going to happen. And Oregon's able to, continually add more points and score easier as the game went on, and then obviously turnovers are having a factor in that and whatnot. But Texas Tech shut out. And this continued a trend that we've seen last season into this year. The teams with the byes are not coming out well. An Oregon team gets to play a JMU team that is, arguably not very good. They were the second highest rated outside of the Power 4 conferences as far as champions are concerned. A lot of people didn't think they could get in or should get in. I think they had a pretty decent showing. I mean, they covered the spread. They put up some serious numbers on offense. But Oregon wins that game. And to be fair, they win it fairly comfortably. I mean, if you watch that game, Oregon could score anytime they wanted. But what it does do is it gave Dan Lanning, who is a very good coach and especially good as a motivator, an opportunity to really lay into his players and say, no, this is not how we're going to do this. This is not how our team is going to play. This is not our standard. You need to show up against Texas Tech this week. And, Texas Tech comes in, maybe feeling a bit rusty, a long time off, right? Not only is this a situation where they didn't play last week, but it's been a long time. I mean, almost a month off, right? A little rust, little difficulty. At least Oregon and JMU were in similar situations as far as time off when then they go ahead and play each other. So probably similar amounts of rust, theoretically. So this continues the trend. Ohio State kind of gets pushed around, especially in the first half, has a very slow start to the game, coming off of that bye, and really just, it's not just a bye, right? It's not just 1 week off, it's multiple weeks off because we start these playoff games so much later. Oregon, not coming off a bye. Miami got to wet their teeth a little bit, right? They got to play Texas A&M. In Texas A&M, on the road, had to win a game against a decent opponent. Absolutely a decent opponent. We have this trend. At this point, teams with a bye, I believe, were 0-6 in bowl games. in these college football playoffs since we've gone to 12, and we instituted this new situation of a bye. So Oregon really pushes around Texas Tech. 23-0. I mean, it was 6-0 at the first half, so I'm not saying, Texas Tech got blown out or anything, although the final score ends up leaning that way. I mean, they lost more than Ohio State. They just could never get anything going on offense, and eventually I think the defense just kind of gave out. So we moved to the Rose Bowl game, and that trend of teams coming off of a bye, not doing well, kind of ended. Indiana smashes Alabama. Absolutely annihilates them. Pushed them all around the field. Looked fantastic doing it. And I mean, this is an Indiana team that kind of pushed around Ohio State in the championship game. And Alabama is not a good football team. We've been on it all year long, especially here at the end of the year. Alabama cannot run the football. Let me repeat that. Alabama cannot run the football. Now, this may be the first time we've heard this in a decade or more, but 23 yards rushing. And if we look at their previous few games, right? Against Oklahoma, 28 yards rushing. Against Georgia, -3 yards rushing. Even against Auburn, 158, about even on the rushing. They were able to run the ball a little bit, but Auburn is a 5-7 football team that is not good. This offense for Alabama is not the offenses of old. It's not the Derrick Henry, Mark Ingram kind of era of Nick Saban just running the ball. But it's not the, Mac Jones throwing to Devontae Smith either. They do not have answers on offense this season. Last 3 games. 3 games. And we're looking at a total of what? Maybe 50 yards rushing? Less than 50 yards rushing. Because this is 23-28 and the -3. 3 games. And a total of less than 50 yards of rushing against quality opponents. And I'm not even saying that, Oklahoma's the best team in the country. Now, Indiana might be. Georgia, we're going to talk about them in a second. They got beat. So, and they, to be honest, they gave up quite a few yards in that game, right? We're going to talk about this Ole Miss. This is a high-scoring game. So against Georgia, who again just gave up 39 points to Ole Miss, against Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma has a really good defense, we think, at least as far as the season is going on. That's been their strength, but against Georgia, Oklahoma, and now Indiana, 3 solid opponents, 3 playoff caliber opponents, theoretically. I mean, again, Oklahoma, they lost to Alabama here, did not look great. Their offense isn't great either. We have less than 50 total rushing yards in 3 games. That is terrible. That is terrible offensive football from Alabama. And yes, they beat Oklahoma to get here and have the right to play Indiana. But I think we can all agree maybe Alabama shouldn't have been here. The trend we saw at the end of the season with the Alabama Crimson Tide getting beat by Oklahoma. Then, they played Eastern Illinois. Good for you. So that they're all rested and ready and barely beat Auburn. Get smashed by Georgia. maybe this was a sign. A loss, a barely beating a bad team and getting smashed by a pretty good team. I'm not going to say Georgia's bad. They're a pretty solid team. But maybe that was a hint that they weren't super playoff caliber. 3-loss team in the playoff? This might be what you're in for. Alabama ends the year with 4 losses. Obviously, people are going to say, what about BYU? What about Notre Dame? What about Texas? Now, Texas had 3 losses, and this is where I get into this. I don't know if I like the idea of a 3-loss team ever getting into the playoff. BYU had, 2 losses to Texas Tech, and they weren't super close. So I can feel as a committee that maybe you sat there and went, well, we know for sure Texas Tech is a better team than BYU. So let's put a team in like Alabama. But realistically, I would have argued it should have been Notre Dame because we're not quite sure with 100% certainty that, Alabama is not one of the best teams or that Notre Dame is not one of the best teams. I think it was pretty obvious and clear that Alabama was not one of the best teams by how they finished the season. It's going to be a great what if for all time. How good was that Notre Dame team this year? We didn't even get to see them in a bowl game. I think it's pretty unfortunate. You can go see my reaction to that. It's in a previous video in a live stream. We talked about I would have liked to see Notre Dame in a bowl game because I would have liked to see them, it would have been interesting to see them play a BYU team. And if they smash them, maybe we sit there and say, okay, Notre Dame really needed to be in this playoff right now. But we don't get to see it. Indiana's a better team. Alabama's out. But this is why we have a playoff. I mean, I love it. We've got enough teams in here that we're not too worried about, a couple of games that turn out to be slightly blowouts. But again, Indiana on the bye becomes the only team with a bye in college football playoff history in the 12-team playoff era. Last 2 years, the only team that's gotten a bye and then won. And they did it in incredibly dominant fashion. I mean, you look at Mendoza, 14 for 16. Like, he didn't even have to throw the ball that much. They just rolled. Ty Simpson, their quarterback, ends up being their leading rusher. And that's the only reason they really had positive rushing yards. He does get hurt in this game, but, I mean, it was a blowout before he got hurt. In fact, Mack comes in, 11 for 16, 103 yards. Wasn't even that terrible, and actually was the quarterback who got them their 3 points. I gave him a little bit of juice there for a moment before Indiana kind of slammed the door back in their face. Which leads us to the final game of the day. And boy, was this a banger. This is a bit of an all-timer. I personally don't love the idea of SEC versus SEC team in the playoff. I don't like necessarily, we're going to talk about it. Oregon, Indiana, it's not my favorite. It's not my favorite way to, have a rematch of a regular season game. 2 conference opponents that already played each other. But this one was a lot of fun to watch. A lot more rushing yards from Ole Miss than Alabama was able to get against Georgia, right? No -3 rushing yards here. 473 yards of total offense. All-timer, great game. Oh my goodness. I mean, I picked Ole Miss in this game. If you go look at my bracket, I just had this feeling that this Ole Miss team was going to be galvanized by the fact that they were abandoned, and they want to prove that they didn't need Nick Saban, that it was about this team and the players on it. It was not just the coach, that they can win without him, and they came out real hot against Tulane, then petered off a little bit. Tulane then was able to score a few points as it went on, but never really in doubt there. And then this game, high energy, and man, these two quarterbacks, gotta give a shout out to these two guys. I mean, Gunnar Stockton took some hits that I am just still shocked he got up from. I mean, there's that one. I mean, we all know it. I can't. I don't have it clipped up here. I wish I could show it. Yeah, don't want to get copyright striked or anything. But man, he got absolutely annihilated. And then he runs down the field, gets him lined up, and runs it in for a score. Man, I mean, he was a warrior in this game. Ultimately, it was not enough because Trinidad Chambliss, I mean, he became, I don't know, prime Patrick Mahomes, Lamar. I mean, it reminded me of Johnny Manziel in college. Caleb Williams would have some of these games. Like, you just couldn't get him down, and he was making plays. Definition of a playmaker down the stretch. Threw it 46 times in this game. 362 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. It was a clean game, right? No interceptions, really, from either quarterback. Overall team stats, both of them have 1 fumble lost, so nobody won the turnover battle. Pretty clean from a penalty yards perspective. Nothing terrible there. Now, down the stretch, I did get worried that potentially they missed that face mask, and that was going to affect the outcome of the game. So I'm very glad Ole Miss ends up winning this game, given a couple of those really not great calls I didn't feel like at the end of the year, or at the end of the game there. But overall, I mean, a pretty clean game, pretty solid game. This was just really solid offensive football from both teams. Do wonder a little bit where the defenses were. I mean, what happened here? Georgia, this is not a Georgia Bulldogs defense of, years past. They didn't give up 39 points typically. But, yeah, fantastic game. I mean, Georgia goes up 21-12 at half. They score 21 points in the second quarter, and then Ole Miss comes roaring back at the end of the game. Fantastic game. Obviously, both deserving teams to be here in the playoff. I don't love seeing SEC versus SEC matchups just because I want something different. We've seen this game before. But shout out Ole Miss for avenging a regular season loss. And Trinidad Chambliss is he's a dog, man. I don't know what his draft comp is. He's a little smaller, but Caleb Williams and him are the same height, according, to the stat sheet and the program. Is he good enough to play in the NFL? I don't know. He looked pretty darn good to me. I mean, he can move well, he can throw well, throws on the run, seems to see the field pretty well. Absolutely a playmaker. So this was a really fun one. I think this is an all-time classic. And, after, it was a 10-point game, but it felt pretty lopsided for Miami. Definitely was lopsided. Texas Tech couldn't move the ball at all. Alabama couldn't move the ball at all. I mean, we had really 3 really low-scoring games, especially by the teams that lose. I mean, 3 points, 0 points, 14 points. So I will say it was pretty fun to end the night on the new year on January 1st with a game with a little offense for everybody. That was pretty exciting. So that's kind of my reaction to each of these games individually. But I do have a couple of thoughts that I want to get into more macro. We're always tweaking this thing, right? Last year was the first year of the 12-team playoff. This year was the first time we got rid of you had to be a conference champion for the first 4 seeds, so that we just flat ranked them, and that's how the byes got awarded, which is why, you had 2 Big Ten teams, Ohio State and Indiana, with byes. So we had tweaks the last couple of years, and I think a lot of the questions on people's minds, and I believe the committee is going to be meeting here this week and maybe next week to decide on college football playoff expansion. Do they want to just make tweaks to the current system? How are we going to adjust this? And I think there's some fairly clear and obvious options as to what makes the most sense and how we should best adjust them. The first thing is, if we look at the first round, I don't love that we had 2 group of 5 or group of 6 teams. 2 non-power 4 teams make the playoff as conference champions, as automatic bids. Tulane and James Madison. Now, I've been very vocal on this channel that we want group of 5, group of 6, non-power conferences need a path to the playoff. It doesn't feel right for a team that is in the same division. Again, this is not AAA to major leagues, as much as Nick Saban may want to tell you that. They are FBS teams. James Madison used to not be, right? They were an FCS team, won the FCS title, eventually get promoted to FBS. That happened. And you can be very excited for JMU. I think that's exciting that they were able to get promoted up. But they are now an FBS team. If they were an FCS team and we were like letting them into the playoff, of course not. I would be against that as well. It's essentially AAA playing in the major leagues. Or, if we started getting Division II teams. Again, this is Division I college football, and it is the FBS, the Bowl Series, not the Championship Series. Both of them are Division I technically, right? So this is not a different, a tier of football. This is officially the same tier, and those teams need a path. Obviously, we're not going to put all of them in. We're not putting every conference champion in, but they do deserve a path. And what does that path look like, and how can we tweak it? Because I do agree it felt kind of bad to have 2 of them in here this year and not a team like Notre Dame, which we already talked about. And we could talk a lot about, Notre Dame over Alabama. That was the debate. A lot of people are saying, oh, it was Miami. I'm going to be honest, most Notre Dame fans, when you told them, hey, Miami got in over you, yeah, they were frustrated. They were confused. How do you jump someone without playing a game, right? The frustration for Notre Dame fans is that in 2 weeks, they dropped 2 places, and all they did was beat Stanford by 40, right? Like, how are we dropping in the rankings? It doesn't make sense. So that was their frustration, and if you ask most of them, I would argue they're more mad that Alabama got in than them in Miami. Most Notre Dame fans, I think, can understand, myself included. Miami beat us head-to-head. They absolutely deserve to be in over Notre Dame. Head-to-head has to matter. Absolutely. Nobody's denying that. But 3 losses, 2 of them coming at the end of the season, -3 rushing yards, getting blown out by a pretty good Georgia team. I think there was plenty of reason to keep Alabama out. But a lot of people will look at this initial seeding and go, well, Alabama probably deserves more, is probably a better team than Tulane and James Madison, right? And they get in. They're the teams, James Madison's the last team in as far as seeding is concerned. They weren't ranked anywhere near any of those teams, any of the BYUs, the Notre Dame's, Texas's. So it feels a little bad to have one of them get in. I mean, Tulane was ranked 20th, right? So what's the tweak that's needed? Well, first of all, I think it's pretty obvious. Conferences need to figure themselves out and figure out scheduling. Okay? And this playoff revealed those scheduling issues. Okay? It first reared its head in the fact that Miami was not the ACC champion. If Miami is the ACC champion, James Madison doesn't get in, and Notre Dame does. Okay, that would have solved that problem. A lot of people probably wouldn't have been as mad. So that was the first issue with scheduling. Because again, the way the tiebreakers work in the ACC are not great, and it kept Miami from having an opportunity to play in the ACC championship game at all. Which almost kept the ACC completely out of the playoff, which would have felt really bad, and I think is maybe a decent reason why Miami got in as well. Like, we got to make sure the ACC gets somebody in. So there was the first issue with scheduling. Again, Miami didn't play Duke, and Duke wins the ACC. Never had a chance to play them, never had a chance to show themselves better, and show that head-to-head. Again, head-to-head is very important here. So that was the first area where this scheduling issue within the conferences reared its ugly head. The next issue, and some of you are going to be, upset about this, is what happened to Texas Tech, but more so, what happened to Ohio State. Let's look at Ohio State's schedule this year. So they win their national championship. They start the season against Texas. At home, they win by 7 points. That is a great win. Okay? But then if we look at their Big Ten schedule, well, they had a couple of cupcakes to get ready for it. Then they played Washington, Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin, Penn State. Now, this was a Penn State team that at this point was in shambles. Purdue, UCLA, Rutgers. Then they played Michigan at the end of the year. Then they scored 10 points against Indiana and lose by 3. Now, Indiana's a very good team, right? I'm not arguing that Ohio State should not have been in the playoff. Not arguing that. But Big Ten, who did they have to really play? They didn't have to play Oregon. They didn't have to play USC. Now, they did have to play Penn State and Michigan, so feels okay. But remember, last week we were talking about this Texas A&M situation. Texas A&M beats Notre Dame at the beginning of the year, then plays legitimately all the worst teams in the SEC before losing to Texas. And if you're Texas, you're very mad about that. If you're Texas, don't get mad at BYU. Don't get mad at Notre Dame. Get mad at the scheduling, that Texas A&M was able to get away with really easy schedule. Texas Tech, not a great out-of-conference schedule. They beat BYU twice. Here they are. Little concerning that some of these schedules are not created equal in the conferences. And so, again, there's a concern there for me that conferences, you need to fix your scheduling. Now, as far as what the playoff committee should do, how should the playoff change? Well, there's talk of playoff expansion. To me, as a college football fan, more, high pressure, meaningful games seems good to me. If we look at the final rankings here that the college football playoff had, go here. Here we go. If we look at these final rankings and we do a simulated, 16-team playoff, depends a little bit on how they do conference champions. Are there automatic bids for conference champions? But even if there were, that means we get the top 14 teams plus Tulane and JMU. So Notre Dame, BYU, Texas, and Vanderbilt get in. Utah does not. Now, Vanderbilt ended up getting beat in the bowl game, and that'll be their final topic of today. Is the SEC in trouble? But, Utah and USC don't get in, we start to that really is right where basically all the 3-loss teams start to show up. Vanderbilt, I argue, didn't really play anybody. Again, problem with scheduling potentially there. But not having Utah ended up playing well in the bowl game, but I don't think anybody would have been that angry over Utah not getting in, especially given BYU's getting in, and so is Texas Tech. That's who Utah's losing these games to, right? They feel, okay, it's fine. We don't get in because there's teams that we played and that beat us that did get in instead. Seems pretty reasonable. And not super highly ranked teams. BYU, they're sitting there going, we had one loss in conference play. We were a one-loss team. We were Texas A&M, right? They were Texas A&M. Except they got to play for their conference championship and then lost it to the same team, a Texas Tech team that was the number 4 seed. Didn't look good against Oregon, but that's besides the point. They were ranked number 4. Would have been nice to see BYU in this thing. Notre Dame, obviously, feels they deserve to be in this thing. And I'm going to be real. Texas, with their schedule that they played, and also the only SEC team so far to have won against against another Power 4 team in any of the bowl games. Now, they did it against Michigan, who is having a boatload of problems right now, so I'm not, it's not the most impressive win, but Vanderbilt couldn't do it, right? Texas A&M couldn't do it. Alabama won. Oh, wait, but they just beat a different SEC team. Again, cross-divisional. Miami comes in and beats Texas A&M. Alabama's losing to Indiana. You go through this list as we go down. Iowa knocked off an SEC team. I think Houston knocked off an SEC team, right? The SEC is not what it once was. But Texas, 16 feels pretty good. It would have worked out pretty well this year. If we look at last season, final rankings of the year, you go down, 14, Ole Miss gets in and Miami gets in. I don't hate that. I don't hate that. And then actually, because of conference champions of Boise State and then Clemson would have gotten in, so we actually could have gone all the way down and gotten South Carolina in. I don't think South Carolina was a really hot team at the end of the season last year. I think that could have been fun. And you're telling me you don't want to see some of these matchups? I know there's always blowouts. It's football, okay? Teams are going to get blown out. It's going to happen. Good teams are going to get beat badly. Oregon's going to beat Texas Tech badly. If they play this game again this week, I bet this game's closer. No rust, might be closer. I get it. Not every single game. I mean, we've had blowouts in Super Bowl. Go look at last year's Super Bowl as a blowout. Right? Philadelphia dominated that game. So there's going to be blowouts, and don't pretend otherwise. But I'm down to see this season. Wouldn't it have been fun to see Vanderbilt versus Texas Tech or Georgia? It depends. I'm not exactly sure how it would have been seeded given the conference championship situation, but 16 seems okay. The other kind of big idea is 24. 16 can happen for this upcoming 2026-2027 season. 24, because what 24 would do is it would actually remove conference championships, and there's certain, media rights and things where teams have signed deals to say, hey, you get to broadcast. Conferences have said, hey, Big Ten, you get to broadcast our championship game. That would have to go away in the 2014 playoff, but Could be interesting. I like taking the power away from the college football playoff committee. I just like non-subjective things. I like teams getting to play on the field so that we can find out, is Alabama overrated this season, right? I could sit there and I could have been wrong. I was pounding the table saying, Alabama should not be in this thing because they can't run the ball, and really, I mean, they rely on Ty Simpson to throw the ball and have a great game, but against any decent team, they're losing or barely beating bad teams, and I can say they don't deserve to be there. But I'm glad, in some ways, that we get to see that. And that's why I'm a little disappointed Notre Dame didn't play a bowl game, because I want to see, I felt Notre Dame was a better team, was more deserving of getting in. But we want to see more football games played on the field. Upsets happen all the time. Miami was not supposed to beat Ohio State. Glad we got that game. And that's why the playoff is fantastic. Look at Ohio State last year. I mean, they lose to Michigan at the end of the year. And Michigan was arguably worse last year than they are this year. And then they run the table and dominate everybody for national championship. We like to see the games on the field. Not to say Michigan was the best team last year. Just play the game. We enjoy those games. They're fun to watch. I'm glad I got to see Ole Miss Georgia. That was a game we wouldn't have seen last, before the 12-team playoff, because Ole Miss wouldn't have made it. Georgia would have been in, and Ole Miss wouldn't have had a chance. Neither would have Miami. And now we're looking at the two of them are going to play each other. One of those two is going to be in the national championship game. So that's pretty exciting. So I like more games. I like more accessibility, and I like pulling it away from the committee. So, the 24-team playoff, the way it's structured, I do kind of like, because it's basically all auto bids for the most part, as far as certain conference champions and really top four in various conferences, and then certain numbers of at-larges. And at 24, I mean, the one thing that will happen if we do go to 24 is you are going to have some blowouts, right? I mean, James Madison playing Indiana, if it's seeded that way, depends on how you do the buys and whatnot, but there's going to be more blowouts. But there's also going to be some upsets. It's going to happen. We seen multiple upsets already in a 12-team playoff. There's going to be some upsets in those big games, and I enjoyed watching some of the bowl games, and those are exhibition games that don't even really matter, and I'm enjoying watching, Georgia Tech and Houston play in those bowl games, right? And get wins, or Iowa get a win. As a Notre Dame fan, it was very enjoyable to see TCU beat USC. That's fun. And if you add those into a playoff game, I'm going to want to watch them even more, because they really mean something. So, more games, I'm not going to complain about more games. Is 24 too many? I don't know. I think the biggest thing that I have a concern about in that type of a situation is we need to make sure we fix the calendar. Because right now, the calendar in college football, I wholeheartedly agree with Dan Lanning, and what he said is, hey, we need to move these games, and we need to not take so much time off. One, I think it's bad for the teams with a bye. They have to sit for so long without playing. But then two, it's good to keep the momentum of the season, and it would be great to have the season over by January 1st. It'd be really great to have a good culmination, and the season's over. That way, it's all over before NFL playoffs start. I mean, I'm super excited for the 2 college football semifinal games. We'll talk about them on this channel. But they are Thursday and Friday night. They're not Saturday. And, New Year's Eve and New Year's Day have historically been college football days. I like the idea of the national championship being on New Year's Day. It used to be. We used to crown a national champion after New Year's Day. There weren't games after New Year's Day. Then we kind of pushed it off an extra, few days for the BCS game. But now we're jumping into mid-January, and it really is screwing with the schedule. Both from the fact that you're now competing and you have to get bumped off of Saturdays, which should be sacred for college football. Couldn't agree more with Dan Lanning there. On a Thursday and Friday night with the NFL. I don't want to compete with the NFL. Don't like them getting pushed off. So, from that perspective, if you go to 24 teams, I have to do the math a little bit. I think it's possible because they're getting rid of conference championship games. You slide some things around. But I'd like to see the season wrap up a little sooner. We've got transfer portal going on right now. I mean, Oregon has players entering the transfer portal, and they're playing a college football semifinal coming up. Ole Miss is going to be without multiple assistant coaches coming into the college football semifinals. That doesn't feel good. That does not feel good. And it's mostly because the schedule and the fact that school started, the next semester started, you got to transfer. The transfer portal is only open for a short period of time, and coaches need to be with their new teams, etc., etc. It's just a bad situation. I know Tulane, their coach is moving on, right? And they said, oh, well, he'll coach through the end of our playoff run. But let's also be honest, they didn't expect to win that first game, and he would then have plenty of time to prepare in his new job and be ready for the transfer portal opening up. Feels bad to me. Feels real bad to me that we have teams still playing and players on those teams are transferring right now. So let's try and wrap it up. So those, as far as tweaks are concerned, I think conferences need to take a little bit of ownership and say, hey, we're part of the problem. Raise their hand. I'm part of the problem here. We might need to do some divisions. If you want to be real fair about it, reseed the divisions every single year based off of their record or based off of, top 25 rankings or have a Big Ten committee that ranks all the Big Ten teams at the end of the year, and then just, number one team goes over here, number 2 and 3, number 4, bounce it back and forth, and or just 1, 2, 3. I mean, we can keep it real simple. 1, 2, 3, right? And just you go over here, you go over there, and redo that every year for scheduling purposes. I mean, the NFL does essentially that, as far as the Super Bowl winning team gets theoretically the hardest schedule, and then the team with the first pick gets the easiest schedule. Set it up that way and just kind of reseed for scheduling every single year. That'd probably be the best way to do it. If you're these conferences, for in-conference games. Obviously, the out-of-conference games, you need to schedule them further in advance. I totally get that. But for in-conference matchups, yeah, just ping-pong them back and forth. You play here, you play there, and redo it every year. It seems totally reasonable to me. If you need to do it every couple years, fine. But honestly, I just need divisions however you say it needs to happen. I need divisions so that we can have some parity and some structure into the fact that, again, like I've said many times before, it feels bad when over the course of the season, you don't feel like you get to play the teams that you're competing with for a spot. Miami doesn't get a chance to win their own conference, and they didn't play either of the teams in the conference championship. A team like Texas is sitting here going, we played everybody. And because we played everybody, and because we lost an out-of-conference game at the beginning of the year, and because of how the conferences are set up, Texas A&M gets in ahead of us in the playoff. Alabama makes the conference championship game ahead of us. Feels kind of bad if you're Texas. So, Divisions would be nice. That's number one tweak is the conferences need to take some ownership and solve that kind of scheduling imbalance problem within their own conferences and within their tiebreakers and all of that. And then if we're going to tweak the committee and how we're doing this, next season is the earliest we can make a change. And for next season, we could move to 16. We can't move to 24. To me, 16 feels okay. 24, I think, feels better just because more automatic qualifiers. But I also do understand the, like, hey, we don't want everybody in this thing because that kind of devalues the regular season. I think 16 is probably a good sweet spot. And I think there also could be an adjustment to say if we keep automatic, five highest ranked conference champions. I do think it's potentially reasonable to say they have to meet a certain threshold. What that threshold is, I'm not exactly sure. I would have probably put it, if we're going to 16, I'd put it maybe at 20. But also, I'm okay with getting rid of all of those. If we go to 16, a good group of 5 team can get into the top 16. But again, I don't love a ton of power in the college football playoff committee. I mean, it just doesn't feel right to me that a committee is deciding this. I want them decided on the field. That's why I liked that Miami got in over Notre Dame, because it was decided on the field. Didn't like that Alabama was not punished for very poor play on the field. Feels bad. It just doesn't, it never feels good to have a game that is objective in the fact that there is a score at the end and you are just playing the other team. Obviously, refs can have an effect, but at the end of the day, it's pretty objective who was better that day and in that game. Have aspects that are all decided by committees. It just doesn't feel good. It really doesn't. But yeah, those are my thoughts. I'm open to 16. I'm open to 24. We can get 16 by next year. I say let's do that. Let's see how it goes. Maybe tweak how some of these automatic conference bid qualifiers are, and we'll just go from there. But let me know in the comments down below if you're watching this afterwards. I'm going to end the live stream here. Thanks for hanging out, those of you that were. Audio looks good. Yeah, I saw that earlier. Thank you. New setup, so working through a couple of kinks here. But yeah, I really appreciate everybody hanging out. And we'll see you tomorrow. I'm going to talk tomorrow NFL. We had Black Monday today. Tons of coaches getting fired, lots of turmoil. And we have the final, what the playoffs are going to be. So we're going to talk about that all tomorrow, talk NFL. Probably at the end, we'll also talk a little bit about my concerns with the College Football Playoff Committee and the fact that certain people on it have invested interest in certain teams making it. And we'll look at some of the Joel Klatt was talking about. I don't like that ESPN has exclusive rights to this thing. We'll talk about some money and get into some little bit of a shady situation we have in college football. It is better than it's ever been, in my opinion. Love the playoff. Love these playoff games. But we can keep getting better. Always looking to improve. So we'll probably talk about that and save that for the end of the show tomorrow. Look forward to seeing you there. All right. Everybody have a good night, and we'll see you then.